Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you're enjoying the fabulous food from our friends at Caravan. Can we give Caravan a shout out, everyone? A round of applause, please. Thank you so much for hosting us, Caravan. Again, it's the first time they're kind of hosting any kind of event like this, so deeply appreciative. For those of you who don't know, we are Our Commonwealth 670. We are a grassroots nonprofit here in the CNMI. Our mission has drafts here and there, but more or less we're dedicated, to protecting our ancestral land, seas, and skies from irreparable damage and harm from military practices or any other things that could damage that in that kind of way. And we do that by raising awareness about these issues and other things concerning happening here in the Marianas. I am the vice chair of the board of directors. My name is Zeno Camacho de Leon Guerrero Jr. And we have our other board members here who you will hear more from soon. We have Kathy Yuknavage back there as well. Thank you so much. We have Mallory De La Cruz as well back there as well, and Kunhi Han as well. We're kind of walking around doing our business. So if you see us, say hi. We would love to talk and chat with you. But that's just some housekeeping. I hope everyone has their program that's kind of guiding us through the night. So we'll have some welcoming remarks from yours truly and also from our chair, Miss Isa Ariola. Can we give her a round of applause too? But before that, we have our guest lecturer coming in, a Q&A session happening afterward, and then we would have a book signing and closing. If you signed in, your name is inputted for a random book raffle. So you have the chance to win some of the books written by our guest speaker today. He is a renowned scholar. I won't get too much into his details because someone's going to do that for me. But in the back of your program, you'll see a little bio, some resources if you want to learn more about the issues. And if you want to stay connected to our organization, there's some resources there as well. So again, thank you for coming. And with that, I will pass the mic to our fearless chairwoman, Dr. Isa Ariola. Please give her a round of applause.
It's such an honor to see all these beautiful faces out there. It's quite a turnout. This is such an important event. We're so honored to have Dr. David Vine, who I can now call a friend, come all the way out to Saipan and the CNMI. He's actually been here before. This is his second time. The first time he came out was in 2011. But David Vine's work is just so critical. It's a timely moment to be talking about geopolitics, about militarization, about U.S. foreign policy, especially as the region is increasingly militarized. And our home, of course, we know is within the Mariana Islands training and testing study area. And so David, one thing I've always appreciated about his work is that he's really never forgotten the CNMI. He's always understood that the CNMI is a critical part of the U.S. security apparatus, not just focusing on Guam, not just focusing on Hawaii, but specifically the CNMI and Saipan. He is a world-renowned author. You see his books in the front there. He's known for Island of Shame, Base Nation, and United States of War. If you win a copy, it's free, and you get it signed by Dr. David Vine. It's truly an honor to introduce him today. David's work really sheds light on the often unseen effects of America's network of overseas bases, from displacement to environmental damage to the ways that militarism shapes our everyday life and domestic life in the U.S. His research has been featured in major outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Guardian, as well as the Nation. If you look in the back of the program, there's a lot of resources that you can find there about his work. And importantly, he continues to inspire conversations about justice, accountability, and peace. And that's why we're here, to think through ways forward, right? Not just about the detrimental aspects of militarization, but to really form a way forward. And that's what we need here. So I wanted to mention one thing. I just want to dedicate tonight to Sinta Kaipat, because she was who remembers Sinta Kaipat? Yeah, I really feel her here tonight. She was such an important part of inspiring this group, right? She was a fierce defender of our islands, especially up north. And, we really owe it to her sparking this for all of us. And so we're continuing this in her honor. And also to protect our lands, as Zeno mentioned earlier. So again, thank you all for being here so much. We're so excited, very, very honored. And Dr. David Vine, the floor is now yours.
the slides. Where's Rico?
Half a day, everyone. Half a day.
It's on.
Excuse me for coming. Thank you, Dr. Ariola, a dear, dear friend of mine. Thank you all for coming tonight. I feel extraordinarily grateful that you have joined us tonight, joined our Commonwealth 670 and me, and Caravan of Food. I am thrilled to be back in the CNMI, thrilled to be back in Saipan. I feel extraordinarily grateful to everyone connected to our Commonwealth 670 for making it possible for me to come back for the first time in 14 years. My experience here was extraordinarily important, and I owe a huge debt of gratitude to people in Saipan and Tinian, as well as Guam, for the way in which you taught me and have continued to teach me during the visit and after in ways that influenced my books, Base Nation and the United States of War, and that have influenced my thinking in a whole range of ways. I do want to say a special thanks to my dear friends, Dr. Ariola Isa and Nake Flores from Guam, Guahan. They are friends who are part of the steering committee of an organization that we are part of together called the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex. The Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex. That's something I'll be talking a bit about tonight. But I really owe them and the entire steering committee a great debt of gratitude. The ideas that I'm going to be sharing tonight and exchanging with you are ones that I really can't claim credit for. They are ideas that we have developed together. Isa and I co-authored an article in The Nation that presents some of these ideas that, again, were not just our ideas, but were ideas developed with the entire steering committee and the entire network to dismantle the military-industrial complex. I want to say thanks again for helping me to return and the role that Isa and Nake in particular played in making it possible for me to return. I also want to quote my friend, Julian Uggan from Guam, who in a fantastic chapter describes wanting to lay flowers at the feet of activists who are doing the work on a daily basis. And I want to lay flowers, at least metaphorically for now, hopefully real ones before long, at the feet of Nake and Isa and our Commonwealth 670, Kutehi, Guahan, and other activists across the Marianas who have worked tirelessly on a daily basis to make the Marianas and the world more peaceful, more just, more equitable, and have won tremendous victories, I should say. It's important to point out. Saving Pagan, reducing the military's impact on Tinian significantly. These are major victories that should be celebrated, and I celebrate them and want more people around the world to know of them and to celebrate them. I should also point out, I somehow missed this. The CNMI passed a ceasefire resolution just months into the US-backed Israeli genocide in Gaza. That is a tremendous victory. Again, one that has not been, yes, let's give it a round of applause. A genocide that sadly is not over. We need to remember, amid a so-called ceasefire that is really only being partially followed by the Israeli government. What I'd like to do tonight is share some ideas. I'm very excited to hear your thoughts, your questions, your responses, places where you disagree with me. I learned so much my last visit. I am sure I'm going to learn a tremendous amount tonight and throughout the rest of my time here in the CNMI and then back in Guam. I'm going to share a few central thoughts revolving around a deep-seated belief that the system is broken. The system in our country is broken. It's broken in, I think, some important ways that you know far better than I here, but you aren't alone. The system is broken around the country in ways that are directly linked to the military-industrial complex. Not the military itself, the military-industrial complex. So I'll talk about that. I'll talk about ways I think we can fix the system and must fix the system. I think activists here, our Commonwealth 670, activists in Guam, are exactly right in resisting the buildup of the military presence in the Marianas and throughout the Pacific. They're exactly right in resisting a buildup that is extraordinarily dangerous for the Marianas, for the Pacific, for the world, and that is actively harming people in the Marianas and is an integral part of why our system is broken. I also want to counter some myths, some very popular myths, deeply embedded myths, myths that are embedded in my mind in some ways. I'm still engaged in a process of uprooting them. 3 central myths that I think operate here in the Marianas and throughout the United States and beyond. One, that the military buildup in the Marianas and throughout the Pacific is an economic boon, is economically beneficial. It is for a few people, but broadly speaking, I will hopefully show how it is not. Second, that we need a military buildup to deter China and to defend against a supposed Chinese threat. This too is a myth. This too is a myth, for reasons that I will hopefully explain. Third, that China is a threat to the Marianas, to the United States, even to Taiwan, where there is a threat. But I think it's a grossly exaggerated threat. The supposed threat to the United States is even more grossly exaggerated. Again, I will talk about this myth in more detail. First, let me say one more thanks. And that is a thanks to the people of the Chagos Archipelago, the Chagosians. The people of Diego Garcia, the largest island in the Chagos Archipelago, whose story, if you don't know it, will sadly probably sound very familiar. And they are ultimately why I am here tonight. I owe my career to the Chagosians. I owe my career to the Chagosians. The Chagosians are an indigenous people, the indigenous people of the Chagos Archipelago, a group of islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the largest island of which is Diego Garcia, hosts a massive US Navy and Air Force base. Chagosians are the descendants of enslaved Africans and indentured Indians who over time created a new and distinct society and became a new and distinct people who are recognized as an indigenous people by other indigenous peoples. Good question, and I invite questions like that. Don't feel like you have to wait till later. They speak a Bantu and French-based Creole language called Chagos Creole. Happy to talk more about those details, but a great question. They lived on past tense. They lived past tense on beautiful tropical islands. They lived past tense on these islands because during the creation of the US military base on Diego Garcia, the US and British governments forcibly removed, exiled the entire Chagosian people from their homeland and dumped them in exile. 1,200 miles away to build this base, 1,200 miles away on the western Indian Ocean islands of Mauritius and the Seychelles. This was in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Since that time, the Chagosians have been struggling to return to their homeland, and I am happy to say, in addition to the victories I celebrated earlier here in the Marianas, the Chagosians are closer to returning home than ever before, closer to getting their land back than ever before, and by the end of the year, there should be a treaty signed that will allow them to go back to all their islands except Diego Garcia. Not a complete victory, as they are the first to say, but a victory. Also some form of compensation. The Chagosians and others in the Marianas are among more than 20 groups of people that I've been able to document who have been displaced from their homes by the creation or expansion of US military bases outside the 50 states in Washington, D.C. And this is just since 1898. Just since 1898. This is a map that depicts the peoples, almost entirely indigenous peoples, who have been displaced. History linking the Chagosians, the Marianas. They, of course, follow more than a century, the late 18th century, 19th century, during which US military bases on the continent, US Army forts, played key roles in displacing indigenous peoples across the continent, played key roles in the colonization process across North America. This is a map. The squares are US Army forts overlying indigenous peoples' lands, Native Americans' lands on the continent. The CNMI and Diego Garcia, the Chagosians, are linked in another way. You'll see this document, hopefully you can read it, I'll help. Up here we have the Indian Ocean. This is a document from the 1960s outlining something called the strategic island concept, which was part of how the base on Diego Garcia was built. Up here you have Diego Garcia identified as a key island for acquisition under the strategic island concept, a strategy to acquire small islands on which the US military could build future military bases in the era of decolonization. US officials were growing increasingly concerned that they would lose access to bases around the world. Their answer to that was, let's grab some islands, and then if we get kicked out of other islands, we can build some new ones, new bases, that is, on these islands. Diego Garcia became the prime object of acquisition, but you'll notice here in the Pacific Ocean, both Saipan and Tinian are identified as islands to be held on to in the case of the Northern Marianas, because of course the United States already controlled islands throughout the Marianas. In the case of Diego Garcia and the other Chagos Islands, Britain controlled the islands, and in short, the two governments conspired to create a new colony in the era of decolonization called the British Indian Ocean Territory that was established with one reason, for one purpose, and that is to create one or more military bases and to get rid of the indigenous Chagosian people, which is precisely what the US and British governments did with the help of a secret $14 million payment the US military transferred to the British government in 1966. If you could see up here, the population of Diego Garcia is identified as around 500. That is actually not accurate. There were around closer to 1,000 Chagosians on Diego Garcia, and between 1,500 and 2,000 Chagosians throughout the archipelago. Although the abbreviated word of the CIA, which estimated the population of the archipelago at NEGL. Anyone know what NEGL stands for? Negligible. That's how the CIA described the population on the islands in the Chagos archipelago. speaking volumes about how US government officials thought or didn't think about the Chagosians. Including, yes, very similarly. Henry Kissinger had very similar words about the Marshallese, indeed. The racism underlying this kind of belief system is obvious when one considers that almost all the US government officials involved and the British government officials involved were, of course, Euro-American white men. The Chagosians, of course, people of African and Indian ancestry. I want to read a bit from what I wrote about the CNMI in my book, Base Nation, from my last visit. Could have perhaps entitled the chapter in which this appears with this quote from a Navy representative. It depends what you mean by destroy. It depends what you mean by destroy. That's what I heard from a Navy representative. You know nothing good is coming when a Navy lawyer responds to a question about the destructive impacts of bombing practice with the words, it depends what you mean by destroy. It was 2011, and the Navy was holding a public meeting on Saipan. The meeting was part of an environmental impact statement process for proposed military training and testing in the Marianas. Many locals were especially concerned about the bombing of FDM. Many in the Northern Marianas and Guam view the environmental damage caused by military bases in recent decades as part of a long history of damage, Many in the Marianas view the environmental damage caused by bases in recent decades as part of a long history of often unremediated damage dating to World War II. The battle to take Saipan from the Japanese military devastated the island, as all of you know all too well. In many cases, munitions, debris, and military equipment remained for years where they lay at the battle's end. Across Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, unexploded ordnance still lies buried underneath the soil or exposed to the elements. On the grounds of a recently proposed housing development on Saipan, for example, residents uncovered more than 1,000 World War II era bombs. In other cases, the military disposed of hundreds of thousands of pounds of ordnance locally through detonation, burning, or dumping at sea. Since the war, the long-term presence of bases and troops has inflicted even broader damage. On Saipan in the 1960s, US troops dumped radar equipment containing PCBs in the village of Tanapag. After finally telling the government of Saipan about the materials in 1988, the Pentagon had to ship away more than 1 million tons of contaminated soil for treatment on the continent. Others have identified at least 4 dumping sites that still likely contain tons of military debris. Some believe the military stores Agent Orange on Saipan as well, and I'd be interested to know if there's more documentation of that. It's no coincidence that places under colonial or semi-colonial rule, such as the Philippines, Panama, Okinawa, and Puerto Rico, have experienced some of the worst environmental damage from US bases. There's a long record of environmental damage inflicted by US bases around the world, on the continent, outside the continent. The same disregard for the environment that the military has shown at bases abroad, which almost always exceeds that on the continent in the 50 states. The same disregard for the environment the military has shown at bases abroad has also been the case on bases in US territories, colonies, lacking the full protections of the Constitution. At the Saipan public meeting I attended, a Chamorro couple, I use a pseudonym here, but Miguel and Janice Muller, told a military representative that they were worried about the bombing of FDM and the military's other impacts on the land, air, and water of the Marianas. An Air Force representative tried to assure Miguel that the military would be looking at all the impacts of training in detail. But the answer didn't satisfy him. We're tied to the ocean and the land, Miguel told him. But you're only connected by a job. There will be ample monitoring of water quality, the representative responded, cutting Miguel off and ending the conversation. I asked Miguel and Janice Muller if they felt their concerns were heard at the meeting. No, said Janice. To Janice, it seemed the military was just trying to persuade people to go along with their plans. I feel like they have an agenda. I honestly feel like they were trying to sell a product, she said. It's a product I don't want to buy. Janice asked how Manhattanites might feel having live explosives tested so close to their homes. Maybe they can come back after 25 years. And how do they feel when there's some unexploded ordnance there? Tell me after 25 years, and maybe we can sit down and maybe we can share the same lens, she said. But at this point, they can't see what I'm seeing, or even have an inkling of how it feels to live in this remote area, being a United States citizen and part of the American family, and you don't really matter. I think that's wrong, Janice said. I have to agree. And I think there's a lot that's wrong about the way the rest of the United States has treated the people of the Marianas. And I have to say, personally, as someone who enjoys full citizenship rights, as a resident of California and as a white dude, relatively wealthy white dude, I am personally ashamed at the way that people in the Marianas and in the other U.S. territories, colonies, are treated and have been treated. Let me ask a question as I pivot to talk about the buildup of U.S. military forces in the Marianas and throughout the Pacific and the larger patterns connected to the military-industrial complex. I heard today about a school where students are only going to school 4 days a week. Is that right? Should be 5 days a week, but they can only go to school 4 days a week because there's not enough money to pay teachers. Seems to me like something's sort of broken there. I'm curious if people might just briefly identify other things here in Saipan and in the Northern Marianas that aren't quite working. Things that need some fixing. The entire economy, I heard. Healthcare.
There aren't hospitals on the islands of Tinian and Luta, so folks have to fly to Saipan to get healthcare.
There aren't hospitals on Tinian and Rota, so people have to fly here to get healthcare. That seems like a problem.
Even if you get healthcare here, you end up getting medical referral to go elsewhere half the time.
Even if you get healthcare here, half the time you get referred elsewhere to get additional treatment.
There are medical clinics on Tinian and Rhoda, but are not staffed by physicians. They have what they call people.
So no physicians in the medical clinics in Tinian and Rota.
Then the people are referred to here from Tinian and Rhoda for kidney dialysis, etc.
Utilities,
Big time.
housing,
Water.
water. These are basic things. as human beings, we should all be able to expect. But certainly in the wealthiest nation on earth, we should be able to expect. The reason we don't have these basic things guaranteed in the Marianas and across the United States, you are not alone in identifying these sorts of problems, although they are particularly acute here in the CNMI, I would say. The reason we don't have, come back, okay. The reasons, of course, are complicated, but the military-industrial complex and the transformation of the country's political economy to revolve around a military-industrial complex after World War II, which has kept the United States engaged in effectively endless wars since World War II, is a major reason why people in the Northern Marianas and around the United States do not have these basic things. Sometimes people talk about, we can have nice things. By nice things, they mean sort of basic human rights, housing, healthcare, utilities. The system is broken in this country. Donald Trump capitalized on the way in which the system is broken in this country. His electoral victories twice had a lot to do with being able to tap into the anger that people around the country feel about the broken system that we live with. Now, he has broken the system even more since taking office, I would say, firing thousands of federal workers, cutting Medicaid in particular, medical care, food assistance, food stamps. Among other ways, inflation has only accelerated, especially tied to Trump's tariffs, which, of course, we need to remember, tariffs are taxes that are paid by people in the United States, again, taking money out of people's pockets. So while Trump has benefited from the way in which the system is broken and tapped into the anger that people feel about the broken system, he has indeed made things worse. What does this have to do with the buildup of military forces in the Pacific and the military-industrial complex? The system is broken in no small part because of the investments the United States government and ultimately US taxpayers have made in a system of war. A system of war that is represented quite literally by a system of military bases encircling the globe. This is a map of US military bases around the globe. A system, a structure, an infrastructure of bases that have been in place since World War II. US bases have encircled the globe in smaller ways dating to the 18th century. But a permanent infrastructure of military bases has occupied territories around the globe since World War II. Currently, there are around 800 US military bases outside the 50 states in Washington, D.C., including here in CNMI and in Guam, of course. Somewhere between 750 in around 80 foreign countries and colonies. 80 foreign countries and colonies. In recent years, really dating to at least 2001, long before many people realize, the US military has been building bases and forces in the Pacific in particular, increasingly encircling China. but in an accelerated fashion in recent years. The numbers here actually aren't even accurate because the buildup has continued since I made the map. President Biden's term in office, as well as both President Trump's current term and his prior term, were marked by a major buildup of bases and troops in countries and colonies in the Pacific, including Australia, the Philippines, the Marshall Islands, Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, Papua New Guinea, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. This buildup of bases and troops, again, dates to at least 2001 and has been a major long-term and failing attempt, I would say, by U.S. officials to hold on to U.S. global economic and political power and dominance in the face of China's rise as an economic and political power. While the Chinese government primarily has sought to increase its global influence and wealth by investing hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure projects worldwide, the US government has responded by expanding military infrastructure and troops worldwide, in the Asia-Pacific region in particular. Not only is this investment of billions of dollars in the buildup of bases and troops in the Asia-Pacific a bad idea economically speaking. We have billions of dollars to build bases in the region, but we don't have a few $million, maybe, I don't know. What would it cost to build a hospital in Rota or on Tinian? A small fraction of the money invested in bases, the infrastructure of bases in recent years in the Asia-Pacific. In addition to the danger that creates for people who go without hospitals, who go without a normal day of school, who go without proper utilities, without affordable housing, the danger of the Pacific buildup extends because they are only encouraging China's leaders to build up their own military forces. How, for example, would US leaders respond if China were to build even a single military base near the borders of the United States? There are no Chinese military bases near the borders of the United States. In fact, China only has a very small handful of military bases outside its own borders, somewhere around 7 to 12, depending on how you define a base. Djibouti, maybe Cambodia, Tajikistan, and some human-made islands in the South China Sea. That's it, compared to 800 approximately US bases outside the 50 states and Washington, D.C. This accelerating Pacific buildup is increasing the risk of a military clash, even an accidental one, between US forces and Chinese forces that could easily spiral out of control into a nuclear war between the United States and its allies, and China and its allies. Such a war is more likely now than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. A full-scale nuclear war, it's sadly important to remember, could kill billions of people, literally billions of people. As I said at the beginning, I think our Commonwealth, 670, Putehi Guahan, and other activists in the Marianas are exactly right when they have said, enough. Enough with the buildup. Enough with the MIC, the MAT, the EIS, the DEIS, the EA. Been attacked by just acronyms or initialisms. But enough with the buildup. But Many will respond, if we don't build up US forces in the Marianas and elsewhere in the Pacific, what will happen to our economy? What will happen to our economy? Here's where I want to address some of the myths that I think underlie the underlie the Pacific buildup and the buildup of US military spending and forces around the globe. The claim often is that military spending, and the Pacific buildup in particular, are an economic boon. They are for a small group of people, and this is where the military-industrial complex comes in. A small group of war profiteers are the people who benefit most from military spending broadly and the Pacific buildup in particular. Yes, some people get jobs on bases, earn a living, and that's important to attend to. But the vast majority of the economic benefit goes to a small group of corporations, not necessarily even here in the Marianas or the Pacific, small group of corporations and a wealthy few. And a wealthy few. Military spending is not the basis for healthy economic systems. It's not the basis for healthy economies. I'll come back to the military-industrial complex in a second. Military spending, often the claim is, well, what about the jobs? We need the jobs. We do need jobs. But military spending is a terrible job creator. It's a terrible economic development strategy, and it is a terrible job creator. This is research from the Costs of War Project that shows that an equivalent amount of money, $1 million or $1 billion invested in the military or war, creates far fewer jobs than the same amount of money invested in clean energy, infrastructure, healthcare, or education. It's also important to remember that our military should not be a jobs program. Our military should not be a jobs program. Our military should spend the bare minimum to defend the United States and nothing more, because every cent more is a cent that is diverted from doing things like building hospitals in Rota and Tinian, or ensuring that every student in this country gets a good, high-quality education 5 days a week, or that every child in this country can rest assured that they will be able to go to college for free, as in other wealthy nations. We need only look at the red light districts that are so frequently outside the gates of US military bases around the world to know that military spending is not the basis for healthy, thriving economies. They are, however, the basis for enriching what I think are properly referred to as war profiteers. These are the people, the corporations, that make money off of war and preparations for war. This is a graphic that Issa, Nake, and the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex and I created, one of a series of graphics that are available at dismantlethemic.org, dismantlethemic.org, the top. They depict the workings of the military-industrial complex, the political economic structure that our President Eisenhower identified in his farewell address in 1961. I'd play you a clip of it if I had it, but I want to get to questions as quickly as possible. The military-industrial complex, or as scholars believe Eisenhower originally termed it, the military-industrial congressional complex, is that system linking the military itself, the Pentagon, the Department of War, more honestly named now, I think, with members of Congress and powerful corporations, war profiteers, weapons manufacturers in particular, like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, and others, who make literally billions of dollars every year. Half the discretionary budget taxpayers fund every year, Congress allots to the Department of War. About half of that total budget going to the Department of War, the military, goes to private corporations, the war profiteers, the people making money off of killing in many cases. Gaza is sadly an all too painful illustration of how a small group of war profiteers have made a metaphorical killing off of killing and genocide. This is actually out of date. By now, the United States government, US taxpayers, have spent somewhere between $32 billion and $38 billion supporting the Israeli government's genocide in Gaza through direct funding of the Israeli military and US military actions throughout the wider region in Yemen, Iran, and beyond. This is another slightly more complicated graphic showing how people are enriching themselves off genocide. But this is just one example. People are enriching themselves off the Pacific buildup. Which takes us to the next myth. If we were to stop the Pacific buildup, if we were to draw down US bases and troops in the region, who would defend us from China? The US military presence in the Marianas, the US military presence throughout the Pacific, is not about defending the Marianas. It's not about defending the United States. It's only marginally and ineffectively a way to maybe defend Taiwan. But there are far more effective ways to, if you wanted to defend Taiwan, and we could get into that. The military presence in the Marianas, let's just focus there, is not defensive in nature. It is certainly not here to defend the people of the Marianas, and it's not here to defend the people of the United States. You could defend the United States from the 50 states in Washington, D.C. The military presence in the Marianas and throughout the Pacific has always been about one thing in particular, and that is profit. It's been about advancing the profit-making interests of, again, a small group of corporations and a wealthy few. Why was the US military and why were US leaders interested in deploying the US military to islands in the Pacific beginning in the 19th century? Asian markets. US corporations interested in dominating Asian markets. This remains the case to this day. Corporations are interested in the Pacific buildup because of the money that can be made off the buildup itself, and to advance profit-making interests in Asia, and to attempt to hold on to US geopolitical economic dominance. Sometimes people use the word hegemony, but I think dominance. This is this desperate attempt by US leaders to hold on to US geopolitical economic dominance amid the rise of China. And a really misguided, to say the least, and incredibly dangerous for reasons that I mentioned before and we'll come back to because I think it's so important. The historical record also shows that US bases abroad in particular, outside the 50 states and Washington, D.C., although I'd include China, excuse me, I'd include Hawaii as well. US bases abroad have never been defensive in nature. They have been offensive platforms for war. And that's exactly what the base on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean has done. It's been a platform for all the US wars and military invasions in the greater Middle East since the late 1970s. US bases are, while they are frequently depicted as being defensive in nature, they're here to defend us, they're gifts of defense, they are almost always offensive in nature, launch pads for war. The historical record shows, anyone remember that movie, Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come. It was about building baseball fields, and people would come to a baseball field. People sort of riff on that to say, and the historical record shows, if you build them, wars will come. If you build bases abroad, wars are likely to come. And this is what the US record of war making has shown, that US bases abroad have typically led to war, not prevented wars. A US Army study recently showed exactly this as well. Let me quickly say something about the China threat. In short, the military-industrial complex always needs a boogeyman. It has long relied on fear-mongering to jack up military budgets. It has long needed projects like the Pacific Buildup to justify ever-increasing budgets. This wouldn't be problematic on its own. It would be, well, it's deeply problematic because of, again, what we're not spending money on, the money we're not investing in housing, affordable housing here in the Marianas, hospitals, other forms of infrastructure, education. But it is particularly dangerous because it is only making war with China and its allies more likely rather than less likely. And it is distracting the country and the world from taking on the real dangers facing us. The kinds of dangers that people in the Marianas face in their daily lives, the lack of education, lack of healthcare, lack of protection from increasingly intense storms, lack of a green infrastructure to save us from the worst effects of global warming. I think I lost my train there, but let me wrap things up because I have talked longer than I wanted and want to hear from you, and I appreciate your patience. Let me just conclude by saying that I think, and this again is an idea that comes from the Network to Dismantle the Military-Industrial Complex that Isa and Nate and I have been part of. That anger that I think many of you feel about what's not right here in the Marianas, the anger that I think people across the United States feel about the basic things that we should be able to enjoy, we need to harness that anger to demand a system that provides these basic things we should all enjoy. And by we, I mean not just people in the United States, but people around the world. And that is going to mean taking on the war profiteers, the warmongers, the people who are bringing us closer to what should be a simply unthinkable war between the United States and China and their respective allies. We need a movement that will take on the war profiteers, the military-industrial complex, the warmongers, the wealthy few, the Musks, the Lockheed Martins, to follow the lead and the example of activists like those here in the Marianas, our Commonwealth 670, Putehi Guahan, and others, who are saying enough. Enough with the buildup, enough with the bases, enough with the testing, enough with the training. And this is not to say enough with members of the military. Members of the military are victims of this system as well, by and large, with the exception of the highest ranking officials. They too are suffering because of this broken system. Enough with the people who are benefiting from the system, who are enriching themselves from the system, while far too many die. Tius Masi. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, David, for that time and that knowledge that you dropped on us. And so with that, we're going to move into our Q&A portion. And before we begin, I do just want to reiterate sort of our norms, right? We do want to have a respectful space, right, where this is a place of learning and growing. And, you know, we understand that perhaps people here, we're all different people. So it would be unsurprising if we have difference of opinions. And it is okay to have a difference of opinions with what David has said, with what you think. But I hope that we can come to some kind of synthesis between what you have learned, your experience, and versus what David is bringing to our space here. And I also ask, we have, you know, we're very happy to have such a great attendance here. And so I do hope, you know, we don't take up too much space. So please be mindful of your questions. Don't ask too, like, I don't want to filter questions, but I also want to make sure that we get to as many people as we can. So just be mindful of the questions you're asking, right? And just be mindful that we want to share the space with everyone who's here, because I sense the feelings that people have questions that they want to get answered, and I want to do that as much as possible. But I also want to be very forthcoming that we might not get to everybody, right? And we do apologize, but it is what it is. So I hope that you can bear with us. And so with that, do I have anyone who's willing or who wants to answer a question? Also, I do want to kind of give credence and shout out to the NMC students who are here. Thank you, NMC. Can we give them a round of applause? Okay, so I really do want to, I guess I would say, prioritize the NMC students, because I know some of your teachers are here, and so they're watching you. Extra credit professors, come on. And so any NMC students, anyone who has a burning question, and I kindly request, because I'm friends with your professors, please give them extra credit, respectfully. Anyone with a question? Back over there, thank you. And then David, you have your mic. Okay. There are 50 plus bombs on Tinian. If the Marianas and Tinian became internationally known, are we at risk of war and needing to evacuate?
The bombs meaning unexploded ordnance, or bombs for future wars?
Both, but I think mostly unexploded ordnances.
I don't know the specific danger of these unexploded bombs in particular, but I think the obvious truth is that the US military and the US government more broadly have not come close to fulfilling their responsibility to clean up the unexploded ordnance and other environmental damage caused throughout the Marianas and throughout the Pacific and around bases and former war zones around the world. I do have to say one other difficult thing in response to that question when it comes to bombs that might be here in the Marianas, that are here in the Marianas, to wage future wars. Given the way in which the buildup in the Marianas and throughout the Pacific has made the Marianas more of a target for China, for North Korea, Russia, I am very fearful for people who have to live here. I'm fearful for people who live in Washington, D.C. and New York, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're all at risk, but you are even more at risk because of your proximity to the likely war zones. And I think an important question to ask the military is there any plan for evacuation of people in the Marianas, especially those living near military sites, in the case of any rising tensions or the possibility of war?
The mic. Oh, sorry. Auntie Deb had your hand first. Sorry.
Can I clarify that?
Thank you for the catch.
Good question. In short, I'm scared for my friends who live here in the Marianas. I think and maybe I didn't have a chance to emphasize this enough. I am very scared. The United States, again, has been fighting endless wars since World War II, effectively, especially in the last almost 25 years amid the post 9/11 wars, the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and beyond. Those wars have been catastrophic. The warmongers, the war profiteers, the military-industrial complex are leading us down a path toward war with China. Let's be very clear about this. There are people in the US military, and I'm guessing there are people in this audience who can attest to this, or people who know people in the military who can attest to this. There are people in the military who are preparing for a war with China, and many who think a war with China is inevitable, and others who I think sadly want a war with China. Really troublingly, and the words aren't strong enough. There should be a plan to protect the people, of the Marianas and others who are at greater risk of any such war, a war, again, that should be simply unthinkable. A war between the United States and China should be unthinkable. Again, because of the power of the two militaries, although the power of the Chinese military is a fraction of that of the United States. And that's one of the reasons why China is not the threat it is portrayed as frequently by the warmongers. But these are two nuclear-armed nations. Any conflict between the United States and China could easily become a nuclear war that could kill tens of millions of people if we are lucky. Tens of millions of people if we are lucky.
The things that you mentioned earlier, years ago, I've come from Tinian. Years ago, whenever unexploded ordnance from World War II are found, and the military are in Tinian, they really expedite. There's a place where they're all stored and they detonate them. That's not happening today. What you said earlier is that it no longer is a priority, and they go unanswered. They're not even taken out. In the village homesteads, as people are clearing their land, there have been a lot of boom, because they're burning. And not knowing, because these are bombs from World War II and they're buried. But that's the difference, my observation today and, decades past. A retired colonel, he wrote the book, he's also an author, When China Attacks. I can't remember his name. And I had asked him, where do you go when you know you have a target on your back? Because war nowadays, you don't have time to go and run or dig a hole. They have bombs that is called cratering bomb, and I asked, what is that? This is at the last public hearing in Tinian. They didn't answer what a cratering bomb is. Now, I figure it's something that craters into the ground. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Auntie Deb. And we'll move on. So can I just see who had their hands up? I know one here, one. Okay, and then Lenny as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anybody else? Okay, just making sure I get the people who've raised their hands. So 1, 2, 3, 5. take that note from now.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if this is on. Thank you, Dr. Vine. I have a couple of questions and a comment.
Do call me David. Issa was very nice, but I love David.
You mentioned some people said that there was possibly Agent Orange stored here on Saipan. When I first came to the Marianas in the 1984, and went down to Guam, people told me that there's in eastern Guam, there's a whole series on the tip. There's a whole series of Quonset huts that are covered with grass. And I said, what's in there? It was obviously something and the roads around them were cleared, and the roads were very clear. And people said, well, those are nukes in there. So, do you know anything about nuclear bombs on Guam? And also, I have a couple others about China. If you out here we read, China brought an old freighter ship into Yap, which is part of the FSM. In yesterday's paper, there was an article about Cook Islands differing with their agreements with New Zealand and getting some money or something from China. And we all know about the shoals off of the Philippines, where China has actually built the equivalent of an aircraft carrier on one of the shoals there. And they frequently put Chinese Coast Guard boats in the way of Philippine fishing boats. But having said that, and your statements, which I'm sure are based on all your knowledge and research, the United States military complex gave up that huge base in the Philippines, gave it back to the Philippines. Well, how many American troops are there now? I wouldn't know. But there's an example of where they were, quote unquote, lessening the amount. So I'd be interested to know if you know anything about nukes on Guam in those Quonset huts, and also about the real danger that China is the provocateur in the Pacific, equal to, if not more so, than the American industrial complex. And why did Kim Il-sung say, I'm going to bomb Guam? I got my rockets now can bomb Guam, and he's also lobbing them into the Japanese Sea. And why did he pick Guam, other than that it's a long ways away?
Great question.
Perhaps the fact that he knows information from Chinese that there are not just a base there and aircraft carriers and submarines, but there may be indeed nuclear weapons.
Great questions. Thank you. What if we maybe take 3 questions? I mean, there were a few questions there, but maybe 3 people's questions, and then I could respond to them together. Would that?
Yeah. Okay, so you're noting down these questions, and you'll kind of do a group response.
Exactly.
Okay, just so expeditious of time.
And hear from more people.
Thank you, Lenny.
And
okay, so I'm not sure if you are aware of the covenant between the CNMI and the United States. CNMI being very unique, having sovereign rights to its land ownership by the indigenous groups, right, or the Northern Marianas descent. So from what I know so far, the United States have given very little land back when they do lease, right? In the United States, most of the time, what happens is it's turned over to the National Park Service, right? And then Native Indians or Native Americans. In the Pacific, we do know that Clark Air Force Base and Cebu Bay and then Kaho'olawe, which were kind of returned back to the people, are cases where land leases were exalted and then returned back to the people. In these kind of cases, how many of those lands were at least 50% of what they were when they took it?
And then you're good for more questions, David? Okay, awesome. I saw one over here, number 3.
Hey, Toto Hansu. My name is Quinn Breddy. I'm an MSc student presently. However, I'm not doing this for the extra credit. but I'm currently in a current events in the CNMI class, and there are talks and individuals, and this is one of the things that comes up consistently in there is militarization in the CNMI. And without naming names or anything beyond that, there have been individuals in that classroom that are very confident in their off-duty military, like back in civilian life, views that have led to situations where we're talking, we have a group of people debating different sides, and that led to an individual standing up and saying, look, if the military wants your land, there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. And so that seared itself into my memory. That's something that I've not been able to stop thinking about for around 2 months now. And what would you say, studying this for a while, what works? Because this is unprecedented times that we're living in. What works to dismantle these ideas? Because obviously it's got to be a certain amount of reaching across, saying peacefully, lovingly, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, but, and we've gotten to this point where I'm not sure what that answer needs to be. Beyond that, do we form committees? Do we form groups? What would you say the biggest way to prevent these issues would be?
Okay. Prevent.
I'm gonna hand the.
Okay, I think I understand the intent of the question. All great questions. Let me see if I can. I'll do my best. Nukes on Guam, nuclear weapons on Guam. I'm not an expert on exactly what military weaponry is on Guam now, but I am pretty confident. Certainly, nuclear-powered and nuclear weapons possessing submarines frequently are there. B-52, B-2 bombers that can carry nuclear weapons. I think it's pretty clear that they are there on Guam and in Diego Garcia and other parts of the world. China, North Korea, their role in the Pacific. There are warmongers around the world, sadly. There are warmongers and people profiting off war. And when I say war profiteers, I mean people who are profiting economically, but also often politically. They're making, political careers off fear-mongering about China, or I don't know the dynamics as well in China or North Korea, but there are clearly irresponsible actors in North Korea and China and Russia in particular who are bringing us closer to war and engaging in dangerous and irresponsible behavior, especially China vis-a-vis China with the Philippines, being increasingly aggressive with the Philippines, that are also contributing to an increasingly dangerous situation. But I would say the behavior, base construction, troop deployment by the United States is by far the most destabilizing force in the Pacific in particular. The Philippines famously kicked the US military out of the Philippines in 1991, 1992. This is a map depicting places where there have been major anti-base protests, depicted with both the X and the cross. That's not a cross. This slash, thank you, symbol. The X symbol indicates places where the US military, US bases, have been evicted around the world since roughly World War II. This and all the maps you see are available at basenation.us. You can download them and see them. The Philippines indeed, and soon after the US was evicted from the Philippines, the US military began finding ways to return. So that now the US military has access to at least 9 bases in the Philippines, and surely hundreds of US military personnel have been deployed there since around the turn of the century. Covenant and land back. How many have been given back? The US military, generally speaking, has a very bad track record for giving back people's lands. in Guam, or for compensating people who had their land taken, who were dispossessed from their land during World War II or since then. The same is true in Hawaii, where I'm doing some research now about some leases that are expiring soon, and where indigenous Hawaiians in particular want their land back. But in many cases, the military wants to hold on to that land, a place, Guam and Hawaii in particular, the US military has just massive amounts of land, way too much land, and should be giving the land back. There are cases, though, where people have gotten their land back, and this map attempts to depict, including in Kuhulave, Vieques, Puerto Rico, although in those cases, too, the US military and the US government have not properly cleaned up the damage that they have inflicted on those islands. And that's all the more reason why saving Pagan was such a victory. Otherwise, it would have... Yes, let's give a round of applause for the activists who made that possible. Otherwise, you would have had another Vieques, another Kuhulave. Militarization here, the person who stood up and said, if the military wants your land, they're gonna take your land. Unfortunately, that person, I don't know the other things that person said, but sadly, that is true. And this is one of the undemocratic dimensions of the United States. The president, who is the commander-in-chief of the military, has the power to take land without the approval of Congress, just through an executive order and using eminent domain, or what's referred to as condemnation. Just saying, I want that. This is king-like power, imperial power, undemocratic power. It happened in Tinian, and it's happened elsewhere, and sadly it could happen in the future. We're quite fearful it might happen in Hawaii with these leases that are expiring. Where, anyone know how much the US military has paid for roughly 39,000 acres of land since 1964? For 39,000, I want to guess, $1. Good deal. One US dollar. I'm actually involved in calculating the rent, the back rent, that the people of Hawaii are actually owed if the US military had paid properly for that land. We could actually do a similar estimate. I think the land in Rota and the Tinian leases, you have not gotten nearly enough money in exchange for that occupation of land and use of land. But I think the broader question you're asking about, how do you engage in these conversations? I think it's really important to engage in the conversations. You know, part of the reason I identified a series of, I think, important myths is because we have to take on these myths that have become just conventional wisdom. They are, I would say, propagated by the people who benefit from the myths. And anytime you hear a claim about we need the military because ... ask yourself, who's benefiting from this argument? Who's benefiting from this position? And often it's people who are benefiting, who are spreading and perpetuating these ideas. But we have to engage with them, and we have to engage with people's real concerns like, well, if we draw down US military forces, stop the buildup in the Pacific, what about my job? That's a concern. We need to take care of people who would lose their jobs and find ways to take care of people and have ways to convert jobs and convert places occupied now by bases that can become other things. And it's important to remember that we can convert bases into housing, into schools, into museums, into offices. And there are examples around the world where we have seen this happen. But I think we need to have the conversation. We need to take seriously people's concerns about their own lives and challenge the myths. And especially fear-mongering. Fear-mongering when it comes to China, that often, it is important to say, is also rooted in a profound racism and xenophobia. that needs to be challenged and named.
And I know I saw two questions over here, and then I see you, Auntie Thailand, don't worry, I see you. But I know I have one in the middle here. There was one over here that I think I missed. Was there anyone here? Yes, okay. 1, 2, and then Auntie Thailand.
I'll go first. Okay, my question kind of ties into a question that was asked earlier. I know for so many of us who are from the Marianas, who are Chamorro or have a lot of family here, it's almost impossible to not have family or friends who have served in the military or have a deep love even for the United States, the U.S. military, and it's a huge taboo and viewed as very disrespectful to question the military's presence here or any sort of involvement with the military here. I was wondering if you have any advice for people who live here who want to talk to their family and friends about the military or the U.S. military's violence and like crazy presence globally and also in the Marianas, and how we can almost even, you can cater this also to veterans and people who have directly participated in the U.S. military.
Great
And
question.
then, yeah, do you want to do the kind of round robin of questions? Okay. See one over here, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, over here, back here. My bad. I knew I was close.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. And I am a currently high schooler in Mariana High School. And my question is more likely an inquiry for opinions. So as a student, my concern is the austerity that we are facing right now. So what are some feasible solutions that you have in mind for the CNMI in order to balance the overall issue existing? Because it could be very impactful for the whole public school system students and future generations.
Can you read the last sentence again?
It could be very impactful for the public school system students and the future generations.
Thank you.
And then Auntie Thailand.
My question, 3 years ago, I was in Palau. I was stationed there when I was very young and pretty, acha baby. 1964, 1968, and 78. So 2 years ago, I went back to Palau, and I was so shocked, and here people knows me. I'm anti-military. But I was shocked. Plenty like the World War II. I didn't remember World War II, but I remember the CIA in 1953, 54 to 55. Everything is closed. And every night at 2, our wooden house, which is now I'm staying there with the cement because of the typhoon, my mother, we all got up and the house is trembling. And boom, boom, boom. Nobody knows about it. But anyway, I said, how in the world? Now I thought we're at peace. All this military, young men, all in uniform in Palau. Why are they were there? Why? How is my English brother? Because, you know, I was born in 1941. All Chamorro and English. Not English. Chamorro and Carolinian.
Awesome. And then if anyone else has any other questions, we'll go after David responds.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I'm so glad for all these questions. Let me start with the last first. Why are they in Palau? U.S. military is returning to many places that they occupied during World War II, which speaks to the way in which the U.S. military and U.S. military leaders, U.S. government leaders more broadly, have remained committed to a long outdated strategy, a strategy that dates to World War II, to occupy as many military bases on as many islands as possible, to distribute forces throughout the Pacific. It's a strategy, again, that is making war more likely rather than less likely. Again, just think about if China were to build a single military base, let's just say on Guantanamo Bay. Sorry, not at Guantanamo Bay, there's a US base there, but in Cuba or anywhere near US borders, how would US leaders respond? How would the US public respond? They would demand a military response, some kind of military buildup to respond to the Chinese quote unquote threat. Meanwhile, the United States is surrounding China's borders with literally hundreds of bases and a growing number of bases in places like Palau. The really great question about how do you talk to friends, family members, given how deeply connected to the US military so many people are in the Marianas, Chamorros, and in particular. It's hard. We need to engage with family members, friends. The first thing I would say is that I would encourage people to engage with love and empathy and understanding, and to emphasize, as I have tried to tonight and do, that I am not anti-military. I am not opposed to people in the military. I'm not opposed to anyone except people who are inflicting violence on others, particularly. And I would begin by listening to people's concerns, and I think to emphasize points of commonality. That if many people in the military see their service as a form of patriotism, I think the work that people like Isa and others in our Commonwealth 670, that NAIC are doing, what could be more patriotic than working to make our country more peaceful, more just, more equitable? That is patriotism too. And I would say, I think there's some other things you can do. You can point to ways in which we can reduce the presence of the military while taking care of people in the military, including veterans. I think I didn't get to talk about this enough, but generally what I'm calling for is a drawing down, a shrinking in the size of the US military presence in the Pacific and around the world, and a building up of other forms of infrastructure, beginning with things like veterans' healthcare. Last I was here, I think many veterans had to fly to Guam or Hawaii to get proper health care. That should not be, especially given the high rates of enlistment among Chamorros. So part of the building up can be taking care of veterans as well as taking care of others who don't have access to hospitals or doctors, as well as building up affordable housing, as well as building up preparation for storms, as well as building up the diplomatic presence of the United States around the world and educational forms of engagement, cultural forms of engagement. There's one good story in the Pacific of late in the Solomon Islands where the US government, under the Biden administration, created a new embassy as a form of diplomatic buildup, and that's what we need to see more of, not military buildup. Your question, and because you're a high school student, I really want to make sure I understood it properly. Would you mind reading it one more time? It was a really good question and really important for future generations. What?
For the CNMI, in order to balance the overall issue that we're facing right now?
Great, yes. No, it's such a good question that this austerity is incredibly dangerous for the daily lives of people in the CNMI. I don't know the intricacies of the CNMI budget or economy well enough, but I do know that the US military, the US government more broadly, has hundreds of billions of dollars at its disposal. The investment in the military is a choice by US government officials, US leaders. If the US government can invest hundreds of billions of dollars, billions with a B, in a buildup of US military forces in the the Marianas and elsewhere, it can do the same with investing in your education, your future ability to house yourself, your future ability to get proper health care. These are choices, and we need to demand that the money stop going into the hands of the wealthy few, stop going into the hands of the war profiteers, and instead go to invest in real security for people like everyone here, and especially for future generations. And that's where I think, again, you're not alone in worrying about austerity. People around the country are increasingly angry that the system is, can I curse? The system is fucked up. And people are angry about it and want the system to change. And we can make common cause and build movements to demand that kind of change.
How do we do that? We're facing a multi-billion-dollar complex enriched by, not just locals, but, all our neighboring islands throughout the Pacific area. How do we do that?
Yeah.
And I unfortunately have to say that will probably have to be our last question of the night, just because we do want to. Don't want to do that. Get up to the giving out our books. But I think that's a very great question for David to give some final thoughts and reflections for the night, and also for our chairwoman, Isa Ariola, to hop in and give her perspective from here in the CNMI as well. So David, go for it.
Yeah, I'm sure actually Isa could have answered all the questions that I have, all the amazing questions that I've received. Isa could answer far better than I. That is the $1 trillion question. The U.S. military budget, for those who don't know, is now over $1 trillion per year. 1 trillion with a T, which is a hard amount of money to wrap one's mind around. That's what we're trying to do in the network to dismantle the military-industrial complex, to come up with strategies, new strategies, to take on the power. I think it's a longer answer, but I think it's important to remember that people in the United States and around the world have taken on other forms of entrenched political economic power, like big tobacco does not have the power it once had to afflict smokers and recruit more people to smoke. People are trying to take on big tech. People took on the railroad barons in the last century. There are examples we can build on of people and movements who've taken on powerful, entrenched, wealthy interests, and that's what we need to do. Not easy. I only wish we had all the answers, but we desperately need to try. Not just to try, we desperately need to succeed, because if we don't, the warmongers, the war profiteers are leading us toward nuclear annihilation. And all the while are impoverishing all of us by keeping us from the basic rights that we deserve. Rights to affordable housing, healthcare, 5 days a week education, free college, clean water, other utilities, infrastructure, green infrastructure, storm preparation, pandemic preparation, and so much more. These are the stakes. This is why we should all follow the example of people like Isa and Nake and others in our Commonwealth 670, other activists who are on a daily basis trying to make the world a better place. So I guess the short answer is sign up and become members to our Commonwealth 670 and join other movements. Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you, Swansea.
Dr. Vine, thank you so much. I've learned, I just want to share before we close out, and if your name is called in the drawing, you get the book for free and you can come and get it signed, but I just wanted to share just a short story. So when I was born and raised on Saipan, I went to Northern Marianas Academy. I went to Northern Marianas College as well, so NMC students, right? So I went through that, and when I went to the States for the first time for college, it was actually people like Dr. Vine's work that I read and this was back in 2008-ish. And I was thinking to myself, how come we grow up with so much World War II commemoration? How come we're always talking about the military, but nobody's talking the way, why don't we have that kind of critique on our own islands, right? And so I just started to kind of go down the rabbit hole of work like his and others, right? And it just opened my eyes. My gosh, everybody's having this conversation about us. We're not in that conversation at all. What happened? So, again, if you like what Dr. Vine has said here, if you want to apply this kind of analysis to our local setting in our own communities, please join us. Our Commonwealth 670. We often work behind the scenes, submitting comments for EIS, for the environmental impact statements, for example. Those are very technical. Most people, when you wake up, you're not reading a 1,000-page document, right? So we got to help each other out. No one's going to do it for us. And again, so we take, we draw from our elders before us, like Auntie Chaileng, thank you very much, and Auntie Deb from Tinian Women's Association, right? That's critical. When the younger generation sees you, we have an example. We can say, hey, my auntie, she did that. And so, we want to be the next generation. Eventually, we're going to be Manamko, and we're going to be responsible for all of that, right? So thank you so much. We cannot thank you enough. It's so beautiful to see everybody's faces here and your engagement. Please follow us on Instagram, Our Commonwealth 670. And now we can move on to the free books, which is very exciting, which we got some funding to do, and we're very proud to say that we can do that for you. And then Dr. Vine can sign your book at the end, and hopefully you can meet him personally.
Okay, I'm back here, everyone.